Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley, and I am the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. As parents, we are tasked with many responsibilities, from the basics of making sure our child is fed, all the way up to thinking about their distant future. But the linchpin that connects much of our child's future success is the topic of today's interview: being well organized. As it turns out, a child's ability to be organized may be predictive of all kinds of good things, including future success, self-regulation, confidence, and even generosity. Thankfully, my guest reveals that getting our children more organized is easier than we might believe. Dr. Damon Korb is a practicing developmental and behavioral pediatrician and founder of the Center for Developing Minds in Los Gatos, California. Dr. Korb is president of the Society for Developmental and Behavioral Pediatrics and an adjunct clinical instructor at Stanford University Medical Center. He has written an outstanding, user-friendly book called Raising an Organized Child. I love the book, and I am not alone. Publishers Weekly notes that it is a supportive guide that parents and children alike can profit from as they grow together. If you have children, this episode is a must. Please listen in as Damon and I talk about raising an organized child. Dr. Damon Korb, who has asked me to call him Damon, welcome to Super Psyched.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I'm so glad to be with you, and I've so enjoyed getting to brush shoulders with you over the years, and I've admired your work quite a bit. I was wondering if you could let the audience know a little bit about you professionally and how you've come to specialize in the area you do.
First of all, I'm a developmental behavioral pediatrician, which means that I went to medical school, then I went and did my residency in pediatrics, and then I did a fellowship. Much like a pediatric cardiologist would do, I did a fellowship in child behavior and development. So I became a fellowship-trained developmental behavioral pediatrician. And I run a clinic called the Center for Developing Minds in Los Gatos, and it's an interdisciplinary clinic, which means we have psychologists there and therapists there and developmental behavioral pediatrics and a speech pathologist and educators. And so we have a whole team that work with kids who struggle for all kinds of reasons. How I ended up here, though, that's a whole different question. Looking back, everything makes sense. But 25 years ago, would I have said this is where I was going to end up? Not a clue. I didn't even know developmental behavioral pediatrics existed. When I showed up at medical school, I was ready to be the president of the medical school and the number one orthopedic surgeon in the school. And it took me about 3 days to realize I wasn't a surgeon. We think differently. And then there was just a process of, struggle and trial, and each step gets you closer and closer to where you want to be. I decided I like to work with kids, so it was pediatrics. I decided I like to work with kids who had learning difficulties. Through medical school, I found my own learning disability, which I had fought and battled with my entire life, but nobody ever pointed out to me until I was in medical school. And it just became such a natural fit. By the time I got here, it seemed so obvious in retrospect.
Wow. I'd love to ask you at some point about your learning disability, if you're comfortable elaborating. But in the meantime, Damon, wow, you've written a great book. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I told my wife this morning, who is a psychologist also who specializes in pediatrics, that she had to read this new book, Raising an Organized Child, which I listened to on Audible. And my first question is this: describe what you mean by an organized child.
Well, that's important to clarify. It was tricky to come up with a title for this book because when I'm talking about organization, I'm talking about so much more than just finding two socks that match. I'm talking about the neurodevelopmental functions that it takes in order to solve problems, to show insight, to grasp the big picture, to take perspective. I'm talking about organized thinking, not just neatness and backpacks without crumbled papers.
Right. And it seems to really predict so much. I mean, this one single criterion of having an organized mind has so many possible landing spots in life that predict success. What are the benefits to the child of developing those abilities to have a more organized mind?
So I'm going to answer it negatively, but then I'll answer it positively.
Sure.
I mean, from the negative side, every family that comes to see me, whether they're coming to see me because their child has autism or ADHD or a learning disability, their concern or their complaint really is about the child's executive functions. It's really about, why can't they clean their room? Why do they keep making the same mistake over and over again? How come they're having so much trouble making friends? How come they forget to turn the stove off? It's all these executive functions that frustrate parents. And why do they lie? It's all these executive functions that frustrate parents. And that's what brings them into my office. So we're talking about, how do you build executive functions from the time that you're little all the way through adolescence. And that's what the book covers. It's the same 5 steps that we talk about from the time you're an infant all the way through your teenage years that really help build these executive functions so that ultimately you're ready to launch into adulthood and be able to problem solve and think for yourself.
Awesome. And just to give a definition to those not familiar with the concept of executive functions, just simply put, what is an executive function, or what are executive functions?
So simply put, it's your brain's administrative assistant. It is in charge of your self-control. It's in charge of your ability to shift from one thought to the next. So to entertain multiple thoughts in your brain at the same time. It's your ability to plan, and it's your ability to organize.
I love that definition. One of the most succinct I've heard. So there are different tasks for different ages that you really unpack beautifully. What are some of the tasks that you describe that are so key to helping a child become better organized based on age?
So I did an interview with a TV show in Australia where they asked me about what age should kids be making their own lunches. And I said, by 2nd grade, kids can make their own lunches for school. And I blew up in Australia for 2 days. I was incredibly liked or incredibly
I was imagining
about, and I didn't know that at the time. They put at the bottom of the screen, it said, doctor offers controversial advice. But I
mean, come on, it's just Vegemite. It's not all that difficult to spread on some bread.
Right, exactly. Some parents would say, yeah, of course, I've been making my own lunch since I was in kindergarten. And other parents would say, how dare you tell me how to parent my child? But the point is, it's not that there's critical tasks that kids should be doing. It's all of these tasks that we should be pushing our kids along the way in order to become more independent. You know, we spend 18 years as parents learning to let go. That's our job. It's 18 years of learning to give them independence and letting them to make their own decisions and take charge of things at a safe level when they're ready. And I got to tell you, by the time kids are in 2nd grade, most of them are ready to make their own lunches.
What a great thing. And you are unwittingly stepping into all kinds of phenomena being in the specialty you are, such as you're telling parents how to parent, which I imagine in and of itself is controversial. Like, don't go here. Don't tell me how to parent. I imagine you experience that a fair amount, even when your advice is really needed.
You know, that's interesting. I think actually I am telling parents not to parent so much more than I'm telling them to parent.
Mm-hmm.
We are overscheduling our kids. We are telling them when to use the bathroom. We're laying down with them to help them fall asleep, because we're worried that they won't fall asleep on their own. In some ways, we're over-parenting our kids, and we need to slowly and systematically give them more independence, but we need to do it logically at a developmentally appropriate pace.
You know, I'm thinking about that great book, The Blessings of a Skinned Knee, and how important it is for us to dial it back. So I really do think that you're onto something. You and I grew up at a very similar time, and we turned out pretty well, all things considered, in spite of the fact that the helicopter parent was not an archetype at that time. But I'm even thinking that just telling people to dial it back might also incur some feelings. That aside, I'm wondering, the skills that you're talking about are so important. And you mentioned to me off air that this is not rocket science, and yet it does require a persistence, a consistency from the parents, the willingness to kind of like Rocky Balboa, go in the ring daily, because it's so much easier to just give the child what they want, the iPad, the remote control, some other way to avoid boredom. Let's start with boredom itself. You've described boredom as being a great teacher, most important skill to listen to. Let's hear what your thoughts are on boredom and our tendency to want to just provide an analgesic for it.
So in the book follows a formula of 5 steps. The 5th step, which I believe is the ultimate step you're trying to achieve, is to promote problem solving. You want your kids to learn how to solve problems for themselves so that if they get a bad grade in college, they don't need to call you up and say, what do I do? They know how to talk to the professor. They know how to work through situations and to overcome these obstacles. Boredom is a problem that is always present, and kids need to learn to overcome it on their own. And if we're always handing them a device, and if we're always giving them activities and overscheduling them, kids never have the opportunity to learn how to solve problems. You should be able to go outside with a stick and a rock and figure out a game. And we want kids to learn this imagination and this creativity, because through imagination, so much of our social learning happens.
So true. And the ability to self-regulate, to deal with our emotions as they show up and to use those emotions as real data, launching points for creativity could be the data that the child uses later in life to start a new startup, could be the skill set that they use to tolerate frustration and hang in there for medical school, even though they have a learning disability. And so this really goes so many places, Damon. This is such a huge gift.
Just like when you have a conversation and everybody's afraid of a pause in a conversation, I think parents fear boredom. And so they parent from a place of fear. Oh my gosh, my child's going to be bored. Oh my gosh, he's going to start complaining to me. Oh my God. And so they're acting out of fear. And when we do that, we're not rational. We're not logical in the choices we make. We can't be afraid. We have to know it is okay for my child to be bored. And it is okay for my child to be disappointed every once in a while. Because if they can learn to cope and regulate and handle those things on their own, we're giving them the skills that they need in order to launch.
And, as I think about this, I imagine that parents struggle with an interesting continuum or a kind of a paradox. I want to instill these skills into my child, and yet I want to be needed. And yet it seems that as parents, one of our biggest goals is to recognize that we need to be expendable. And we need to do our job so well that we lose that job to some extent. Has that been consistent with your own experience?
The key there is we have to scaffold it. And we have to provide the scaffolding that they need in order to be successful. For example, in middle school, there's an incredible range in the development of executive functions among students. We have 13-year-olds who have the executive functions of a 16-year-old, and we have 13-year-olds with the executive functions of a 6-year-old sitting in a middle school classroom. And teachers, I think, have all sworn a secret oath that says, I need to get kids ready to be organized independently by the time they enter high school. And some of these kids have the 6-year-old organizational abilities, and so they struggle. So scaffolding is the supports you put in place to allow them to be successful at their level. So parents, I'm not just saying, say no to everything to your kids and leave them outside to run amok and hope everything works out. I'm saying provide the safety and the boundaries and the support that they need, but continually push them at their level in order to expand their talents and to achieve more.
Love that idea. And it implies it's so relational between the parent and the child. And it also implies so much elasticity of the child's ability to grow while having that scaffolding, that safe place to nurture those skills and that growth.
Right.
Love that. So what you're also proposing is it's not for the guy who wants an easy fix. There will be blowback from the child in terms of staying on it, especially for somebody who has a low frustration level, may not have the executive skills commensurate with their age. How does a parent stay in the ring when they're trying to deal with the resistance, almost as if they're running uphill and the hill happens to be muddy and it happens to be a windy day with wind blowing at you?
So one of the things Adam, is, having wrote a book, you're writing a book for everybody. But when you get to do individual therapy, you're doing individual therapy for that one individual. And that's the key, is we have to figure out where our child is and what our need is. Every situation is a little bit different. For example, if a parent has been very consistent and steady, and by the way, step one is be consistent. If a parent is being consistent and steady all along, it becomes much easier when you're sitting at a restaurant and there's a 15-minute wait for the table, when we used to go to restaurants, and there's a 15-minute wait for the table to say, no, I'm not handing you a phone right now. But if you've always handed your child the phone, and now you heard Dr. Korb and Adam talking on the podcast, and I say, I'm not going to give you your phone anymore. Yeah, you're going to get blowback from the child, and you're going to get a little bit of a tantrum and resistance. And that's okay. Don't be afraid of that. Just like sleep training. If you sleep train gradually from the time that they're infants, it's much easier. But if at age 3, you say, okay, that's it, you're going to bed on your own, they're going to cry and they're going to tantrum. And those kids, you may have to gradually desensitize. You may have to gradually pull back your supports as opposed to just cutting them off cold turkey.
Can you give a schedule for tapering or desensitization?
Again, every child's different. But for example, if we're just talking about sleep, sometimes I do this. If you have a 7-year-old who's insisting that you lie with them every night before they go to bed, and then at 2 a.m. when they wake up, they come to join you in the middle of the night because they've never learned how to go to sleep or fall back asleep on their own, it's not easy to just cold turkey that family. So usually what I say is, well, let's do this. Why don't you, instead of lying in bed with them, why don't you sit in a chair for 3 days until they fall asleep? And then why don't you move the chair right next to the door for 3 days? And then instead of sitting in the room with them, why don't you come back and say, I love you every 2 minutes? Just open the door, say, I love you, and walk out. And then after 3 days, every 5 minutes, you open the door, I love you, walk out. Then every 10 minutes, every 20 minutes. By that time, the kids are falling asleep on their own. But it's a gradual confidence that the kids have that you're showing them that I believe you can do this. And we're going to do it gradually and show you that you can do this.
I love that. And you're kind of going back to the scaffolding in the form of doing it little by little is what I'm hearing. I'm also imagining, just again, from the parent's perspective, that there's some loss incurred of not being as needed for some. Is that not consistent with your own experience? Like,
these are great questions, Adam. You know, as a therapist, you see, I'm sure, families who experience loss. And I am also sure that you see that loss is different depending on the needs of that family. So for example, if a husband and wife are in a relationship that is not supportive and they're not getting positive feedback from their partner, now they sometimes misdirect that positive feedback to their role as a parent, and being needed by their child becomes much more important for them. You know, there's so many layers of baggage that we all carry into our relationships that we have to really think about this. But yet the target for you as a parent is to help your child become independent by 18. That's your goal, as much as possible.
I think that's great. And both parents have to be on board. And obviously that's, you know, a relational issue, a whole host of phenomena. It's not that the child grows up in a vacuum, but yeah, I think that's a really important directive for both parents to recognize.
But let's talk about loss though, real quickly, because
sure.
I tell teenagers all the time that it's now your job to start managing your parents. Your parents have been traumatized by raising you. All of us are traumatized by being parents. You know, 2 a.m, we're up in the middle of the night and your kid's throwing up all over the place and it's all over you. And you've spent hours making your child feel better and getting their fever down or holding them while they get stitches in the emergency room. It's traumatic raising a kid. So now by the time they're 16, you have to start thinking about letting go. That's really difficult. So I tell teenagers, part of your job is to show them you're ready, not to tell them you're ready, but to show them. And the way you show them is if you say, I'm going to be home by 8 o'clock, come home by 8 o'clock. If you do a good job in your homework, show it to your parents, because all those little things help your parents go, you know what? My kid gets it and he's going to be okay. And I'm okay letting go. Because that's how you deal with somebody who's been traumatized, is you gradually show them it's okay.
Damon, that is just so spot on with my understanding of trauma. Let's take a little bit of a pivot to autism and ADHD, both of whom have a hallmark of a disorganized brain. Both of these diagnoses can be exacerbated or aided depending on the environment. And you brilliantly speak to that in the entire book, as well as in the appendix of the book. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about these two rather more prevalent conditions today than they were, say, a few decades ago, and how your skills may be profoundly helpful.
So with ADHD, there's been really clear research that shows that the prefrontal cortex, which is this part of the brain right here, that is responsible. For those of you listening,
he's touching the top of his forehead.
2 inches behind your forehead, 2 inches below the top of your skull. And it's in charge of your executive functions, these planning, these organizing features. And the research says that development of that part of the brain in a child with ADHD is about 3 years behind that of their peers. So the planning and the organization and the filter that we have to make good choices and bad choices is underdeveloped by about 3 years. So if you have a 15-year-old, they're really making those decisions like a 12-year-old. And yet they are a 15-year-old in every other way, but their decision-making may not be as good. So that executive function piece is weak. We need to really build that in children with ADHD. In kids with autism, there's really clear research that says they have difficulty handling multiple pieces of information at a time. So for example, if you give somebody with autism a math problem, they can solve it at a certain speed. And if you give somebody without autism a math problem, they solve it at a certain speed. Now, if you give them even more data, the neurotypical person tends to speed up how quickly they process it because they analyze that data quicker. And if you give more data to the person with autism, they tend to slow down because too much data in their head at the same time is often difficult to put together. Now, why is that important? That's important because social thinking about you while thinking about me, requires multiple pieces of thought going on simultaneously. And it's very difficult for people with autism to take perspective. So when I'm talking about building executive functions, I'm talking about how do you give kids the skills to do multiple things in your head at the same time, which is plan and organize and pretend and imagine and create. All those things are working memory tasks or multiple simultaneous processing tasks that happen in your brain.
That's wonderful. I'm going to go to a new subset of the population described as the failure to launch folk. And they're not mentioned in the book, but I'm wondering if you have any insight on this. The 18 plus year old who's still living at home, who definitely did not get the lessons around having an organized mind, who may be very dependent. I'm wondering, might the parent who legally is no longer obligated be able to benefit from some of what you've described in the book, even though it seems pretty late in the game?
Yes, your point is, depending on what has gone into getting them to that point, it may be more easy or difficult, the path forward. So some kids, like somebody with ADHD, may just be a late bloomer. And as long as you keep being consistent and persistent, those things are going to kick in. It may take an extra 3 years for them to get there. For some people, they really lack some serious skills that need to be taught. The tricky part is you have to respect somebody who's 18 or 19 as an adult, but also provide them the support and the push that they need in order to adult, using adult as a verb there. And that's not easy. And the way you do it is you find somebody, either yourself or a professional, to work with your child to figure out what they want. And then you show them that these executive function skills they need in order to achieve what they want. Because if it's what you want, you're not going to get an 18, 19-year-old to move off your couch. It has to be about what they want.
I love that. It has to be tailored in their own words with their agenda, and they will go for it. And I love the idea of the late bloomer. I happen to have been one myself. I showed no signs in high school that I was going to really go the distance educationally. And I remember feeling my, for lack of a better term, I remember feeling my executive functions come online. I was living abroad in Japan, and I had to sequence things in a particular way in order to do well in that society. And I actually felt in my early 20s like, oh, this is beginning to happen. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the late bloomer as a phenomenon so that parents who might be a little bit bereft about the progress of their child, perhaps adult child, might have some hope.
So that prefrontal cortex that we're talking about, again, 2 inches below the front of your head, continues to develop till people are somewhere between 25 to 28 years of age. It's the last part of our brain to develop. If you do experiments that compare adults to teens, what you'll find is the one major difference is in their planning and organizing and perspective taking. So it's very common to see a 20-year-old who just, that stuff hasn't kicked in yet. Now, it doesn't excuse them from responsibilities, but it explains their difficulty following through. And so it continues to be important for parents to keep their limits and their boundaries and their expectations. I'll give you an example. Quite often, I'll see an 18-year-old say, I'm done with school. I'm not going to college. I want to take a year off. And when we used to travel, I just want to travel or do whatever. To the parents, I'll say, that's fine, but they got to have a plan. because going and traveling is a goal. What's their plan? How are they going to get there? How are they going to pay for it? What are they going to do? They need to plan that out. And so you have to still hold them to adult expectations, even if their path is a little different.
I think that's brilliant to distinguish a plan from a goal, and how great it is to put it in the child's or the adult child's words with regard to their goal, because what could be more motivating than that? One of the things that you also wrote about were toward the end of the book was 5 basic skills every teenager must have under their belt. I love that. It's so clear and provides the parents with a framework. I was wondering if you could share the 5 things.
In the book, forward thinking is step 4. So the steps are: be consistent, introduce order, give everything a place, practice forward thinking, and promote problem solving. So in forward thinking, what this means is you have to teach kids to anticipate, to plan, to estimate, to think ahead. And one of the interesting things is the same part of your brain that's responsible for forward thinking is also the same part as hindsight and forward. So if you want kids to learn from their mistakes, you also have to be teaching them how to plan and think ahead. And that's building that hindsight part of their brain. So parents worry and ask me all the time, is my child ready? And I say, the way you know if your child is ready is if they are able to do the need tos before the want tos. And those really, for a teenager, the 5 need tos are: they got to take care of their health, their hygiene, their household chores, their homework, and then they have to have a social life. They have to do something social. If they're doing those 5 things, they're probably ready. They're probably ready to launch. And the reason it's those 5 things is because if you think about it, homework doesn't benefit them now in the short run. We know that helps them in the long run. Taking care of your hygiene, like putting on deodorant, we don't smell our own stink. The only reason we do it is we know if we go to school, someone else might think I stink. So that's why we do it. So all of these things have to do with thinking ahead that don't really benefit them in the moment, but it shows that they have enough foresight in order to survive the world.
Those 5 H's are so predictive of future success, and they seem like such common sense. And yet we know that common sense and common practice are not the same. And it's really up to parents. Wondering how you deal with this one. This one's maybe a bit of a screwball. 2 different parents, obviously 2 different individuals, having different ideas, different agendas, and not rowing in sync. That could be really difficult. I'm wondering, how do you deal with that when that shows up in your office? Like one parent seems to undo what the other parent is trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, I talk separately with the parents in those instances, and I just say it's not going to work. I mean, if you're not on the same page, either your kid's going to split you and in order to get what they want, or your marriage is not going to stay strong. You have to stick together. My aunt always tells a story about my grandparents where they were these cute little 4'11" Russian grandparents that when they would disagree, you'd see them start disagreeing, and then they would walk into the bedroom and they'd be gone for half an hour, and they'd come back and they'd agree. And all the kids saw was agreement. Was their ultimate role. They would go there and they would figure it out, and they'd come back, and I don't know what they did in their bedroom, but when they came back, my 4'11" grandparents will have solved the problem. And I think it's important to show a unified message to your kids. And that's one of the things that I tried to do in this book is make it as simple as possible. Is let's just get back to the basics. Are we being consistent here? Are we sending consistent messages to our child? Are we helping them to be independent? Are we letting them plan for themselves in a safe way? And if we're doing those things, it's pretty hard for parents to disagree on that.
Yeah. And I've kind of spoken to this, but I'm going to ask it a little differently because I really am curious. Many parents may be thinking, I wish I'd read Damon's book. I wish I'd read Dr. Korb's book much earlier. It might be too late. I have a 16-year-old. And what would you say to that?
I've written this book so that this is what you do with infants. This is what you do with preschoolers. This is what you do with school-age children. This is what you do with teens. So it really shows how you can apply these same steps at different levels. So it's not too late in terms of that. The other thing to know is the book takes a developmental approach, not an age-based approach, which means I'm trying to show you these are kind of what's typically expected by age, but you need to parent by where your child's at developmentally. So if you have a 16-year-old who is performing like a 12-year-old, you have to give them the same supports that you would give a 12-year-old. Otherwise, they're going to either disappoint you constantly because you're holding them to 16-year-old expectations, or they're going to get into trouble and struggle and have major problems because they're not safe. You have to figure out where they're at developmentally.
I love that you brought in that piece, because the parent of the 16-year-old who behaves like a 12-year-old will experience disappointment and resentment and a whole host of other negative, perhaps obstructive feelings, obstructive towards the developmental goals that really need to be in place. And I'm wondering, what resources have you found for parents who are in a perpetually disenfranchised and disappointed state around where their child is?
The solution is education. We get disappointed based on our own expectations. If we are setting unrealistic expectations, we're going to frequently be disappointed, and our kids are going to feel that. They're going to see that we're disappointed in them. And gosh, if we're disappointed in them, more than anybody, we're the ones who should be their cheerleaders. And so it's really important that we learn how to set appropriate expectations. So where do parents learn how to do that? So that's, again, why I wrote my book, partly, is to teach parents how to set appropriate expectations. But also they go and they talk to people like you, Adam. They sit down and meet and have a sounding board. It used to be, when we were raised, as grandparents were close and we lived in family units. So a mom could walk over and talk to aunt and say, what's going on? Am I crazy? Does this make sense?
Totally.
But now we're so divided in our society, and our relatives live in India, or they live in Afghanistan, or they live in Persia. I mean, they're all over the world, and we're doing this on our own. And it's terrifying because we don't have a sounding board. So that's where professionals like you and me come in to kind of say, yeah, wait, slow down. This makes sense and this doesn't.
I love that idea. And it is, we lived in villages not very long ago, and so many things that cause us strife are the byproduct of us no longer being in villages. And I'm sure that there are some upsides as well. I have besides purchasing your book, if a parent took only one tip from this interview, what would you want it to be?
One tip from this interview: I know your child. It's know where your child's at. So when we're talking about a developmental level, in order to set appropriate expectations, you have to understand your child's strengths and weaknesses, and you have to figure out where they're at. And if you're underestimating their skills, you're holding them back. And if you're overestimating their skills, you're making them feel like failures. And so really understanding your child's level and not trying to compare them to what the kid down the street is doing or the other child on the soccer team is doing. You want to set appropriate expectations.
Oh, I love that one so much. So Damon, you and I both have suffered our own learning disabilities, mine ADHD of the inattentive type, which meant I was kind of staring out the window when I should have been paying attention in class, and I was dyslexic. So reading was not only hard, but very slow and deflating. And of course, I've found ways to better cope with them so that they don't. Yeah. Tell me about yours.
I got through college by just outworking people. I had an incredible work ethic, and I would study hours and hours and hours when my friends were out playing. And in medical school, I couldn't outwork people anymore. And I started to struggle the first couple of years. I have problems with something called convergent retrieval, which means I can think divergently. I can tell you all about things, but I have trouble remembering the name or your name or my kids' names or dates, specific things. And that's what the first 2 years of medical school is. It's a whole new language you're learning in the first 2 years of vocabulary. And so I, went through just this period of getting bad scores and trying to figure out why, and talking to counselors and talking to the dean. And finally I got an advisor because I wanted somebody to get to know me. And the advisor said, why don't you get tested for a learning disability? And I said, I guess I'll do anything. And I got tested, and I tested really positively as a bright guy who really has this one real specific weakness. And I went back to my advisor and said, this is what I need. When I'm taking an infectious disease class, I need to go follow an infectious disease doctor around. When I'm taking a urology class, I need to go follow a urology doctor around, because then everything became meaningful. I was learning about it from a patient and seeing the whole scenario and putting it all together. And I started all of a sudden acing my tests and doing much better. I had to figure out how my brain worked in order to finally overcome that obstacle that I wish I had learned about much younger. But turns out I learned how to work hard and eventually got help when I needed it.
That is such a great story. And I think that's such an empowering one for the listener, who most of us have something going on, some little crack somewhere. And the fact that you were able to diagnose it, find ways to deal with it so that it wouldn't be an impediment to your future growth. And here you are today, in my view, the great Dr. Damon Korb, because you have a fabulous reputation in Silicon Valley for what you do. Before I ask my final question, which is a fantastical one, I have to ask, is there anything I should have asked but haven't yet?
You didn't ask me about electronics.
Hit me.
What to do with electronics.
My goodness. How could I not have?
So what I would say with electronics is mom comes into my office and is complaining about how much time that her child is spending on electronics. And she's right, because their child is spending too much time on electronics. But what I try to do is I reframe that conversation, because again, it's not about electronics. Electronics by themselves aren't the problem. I mean, maybe if you're letting your kids play too violent games or they're being exposed to unsafe things, that's an issue. But for the most part, the electronics aren't a problem. It's that they're doing the things they want to do before the things they need to do. And so I redirect that conversation to health, hygiene, homework, household chores, and something social. Because if your child is doing all of those things, you're probably not arguing over electronics. You're arguing over electronics when they're not going to bed on time and they're staying up late playing electronics. You're arguing over electronics when you can't get them to take a shower or do their homework, but they're on their electronics all the time. And you're not going to win the argument with your child about electronics. So we make it about things that, come on, everybody has to agree that you got to take a shower. It's health, hygiene, homework, household chore. And that's where we make the discussion, because then it shows that you're trying to actually help them, not punish them by taking something away.
So great. So my fantastical question, if you could magically confer upon all parents the ability to imbue one skill or insight to their children, what would it be? And what do you imagine the impact would be on the life of the child as well as perhaps society at large?
I would love for parents to be able to see how great their children are. All the amazing things that they can do. You know, we get a baby who is totally dependent on us. Within 6 months, that baby is able to play cause and effect toys to figure out, if I do this, this happens. Well, they've learned that somehow. And then within another 6 months, they're walking and they're exploring and they're touching and they're starting to talk. It's amazing what they can do. And they're not going to be perfect. And if we spend our time being disappointed about what we envisioned from our child versus looking at just how wonderful, loving, enthusiastically they approach life, we do them a disservice. And if we can look at them in a positive way, not an unrealistic way, we don't have to tell them they're great at everything, but we can tell them we think they're great. And that confidence, that helps kids get through the tough times.
I think that's profound. As humans, we have such an innate need to be seen. And what you're encouraging parents to do is to see the miracle. A colleague of mine, Jonah Paquette, has written a book on the psychology of awe and the science of being awestruck. And what you're asking for is that. And there's such a virtuous cycle that accompanies awe. We've actually put awe in neuroimaging and to see like what happens when we're in a state of awe. And I love this. That's what a great thing for you to have conferred upon all parents, the ability to be awestruck by their children and to really appreciate. Well, speaking of appreciation, I've so appreciated getting to talk with you, Damon. It's so much fun. And you have offered so many immediately usable ideas to my listeners. I can't thank you enough.
It's absolutely my pleasure. You can get the book anywhere you like.
He's holding up the book right now. Yeah. Raising an Organized Child, available at all bookstores and on Audible. Highly recommend that you check it out.
And I hope you read it and enjoy it and share it with your friends. And it's absolutely my pleasure, Adam. And I look forward to working with you again sometime.
Awesome. Let's so enjoy our collaborations. This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.